In this video, we'll be covering classes in Python. Classes are what group variables and functions into a single entity. Think of these as being a template or a blueprint for creating objects. Okay, we're going to start off by creating a class. What I will do first is create a class called player. And we'll just go ahead and give it some attributes. We'll give it a sport attribute. Let's give it a first name. We'll just call it fname. And we'll call it Russell. And then what we can do is we can create a method that will be, it would only be accessible within the class. So we'll just call it full name. And we need to pass in the self parameter since we're within the class. So what we're going to be returning is the first name. So we call self.fname. Okay, so what we need to do is create a new player instance. And then if we go ahead and print the player, we're going to save this file and go ahead and run that. And you'll notice that what we get back is just the object. So we have not printed. We need to use, to get to the attributes, we would have to use the dot syntax. So then what I'm going to do is just print the first name. We'll go ahead and print the last name. And we save that and then run the file. Then obviously we get the last name. We can also call the method now that we have a player object. So we'll call full name. And obviously it concatenates both attributes, the fname and lname attributes together, and returns us the full name. Now, as we create more and more player instances, obviously there's going to be a bit of a problem. We are basically, every time we create a new instance, we are automatically setting the sport to football, first name Russell and last name Wilson. So what we need to do is create a init function, which is a constructor, which the init will run every single time that the a new instance of the class is created. So we're going to call def init, and then self will be the first parameter, followed by fname. And once again, we have to use the self parameter to set these. So we will set self dot and we do the same thing for the last name. Okay, so now that we have gained a little bit of control over this, so the first parameter we can pass in Russell. And what we can do is we can just get rid of these attributes since we're setting them through the init function. And then if we save that file and rerun it, it's going to give us the same thing. But what's important here is that when we go to create a new player, let's go ahead and do that. We'll call this player2. And we're going to name this Des Bryant. And we'll go ahead and clear what we had before and run the file. Then obviously now we can create different players and they'll have different attributes or different names for their attributes. And also classes can extend other classes. So let's say we're going to have, in football, we have offensive players and defensive players. They're going to have different attributes. So what we can do is create a new class that extends the player class. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll call it offensive player. And then we need to pass in the player class name because that's what we're extending. And we're going to do something very similar here. We're going to call the init function. And we're going to add a few things. We're going to add, let's say offensive players have passing yards. And then we will have to set these similar to the other ones. So self. Okay, so we will need to pass these in. What we're going to have to do is create an instance of offensive player instead of just player. And so let's pass in some stats. Let's just call this 4,500 yards passing, 550 yards rushing. And then since he is a quarterback, we're just going to give him 0 for receiving. Obviously, there can be something like trick plays in which they can rack up a few receiving yards, but it's pretty rare. And for Des Bryant, he's a wide receiver, so we'll give him 0 passing yards. Let's say he ran a reverse, so we'll give him a few rushing yards. And then obviously he's going to have a lot of receiving yards. We'll just give him 1,200. And then if we go ahead and run that, we'll just print out his receiving yards and save the file and run that. And then, so this attribute is printed out. And you'll notice that we're still printing out just the instance of the class, which is in Python, all classes are objects. So we have offensive player in here instead of player, which is what we had previously. And now that we have broken this out, we can also create a class for defensive player. And let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so defensive player, we still need to take in first name, last name, and there's going to be a few different parameters. Let's just go with tackles, interceptions, and sacks. Now, there's a common thing that we are doing here. If you notice that all three of these were basically repeating ourselves with setting the first and last name. We still need to pass these in, but we don't need to do this. What we can do is for everything that is the same, we can call super, and we need to use the name of the class that we are in. And then the next parameter needs to be self, because we're basically calling the constructor of the parent class, which is player. So we need to call init. Obviously, the init function of the player class, those take 2 parameters, first name and last name. Okay, and then so we need to set the unique instance variables, which are going to be tackles, interceptions, okay, once we do that, we can create a defensive player. So let's call this player 3. And we'll just make this Khalil Mack. And then let's say he has 110 tackles, followed by, we'll give him an interception, and then 10 sacks. We go ahead and print player 3. And we'll just print out all these and change the receiving yards. And then if we save that, I'm going to go ahead and clear out all the old stuff. And then you'll see that Khalil Mack we've extended is an instance of defensive player, and then the other 2 players are offensive players. And then we go ahead and refactor our offensive player class, and then basically get rid of these. So we need to call these super class of, what this is, the super class of offensive player, which is player, and pass in the first and last names. So if I go ahead and save that and run that, I should get the exact same result. Another thing that we can do is we can just make all of these parameters, we can set a default. So what we're going to do is set a 0 as the default for all the different types of yards. And let's go ahead and create a new player. We'll call him rookie. And we'll make him offensive player. And we'll call him Joe, rookie. And let's go ahead and print out so we'll just print out his receiving yards, and it should give us the default value. So let's go ahead and clear what we have on this side and then rerun that. And obviously 0 yards is what he had because we did not pass in a value, and it's picking up the default that we had set in the class. Now that we have these, we can also use a named parameter. Let's just say he plays 1 game and then racks up a few receiving yards. So we could actually use the named parameters, so we can just pass in receiving yards like this. Let's give him 55 yards for the game he played. And save the file and rerun this. And then it's picking that up. So even though we're passing it in as a third param, as long as we use a named parameter, it will work just fine. And then if we were to print out his passing yards, for example, it'll still be the default. And let me save that clear. And obviously passing yards 0, and then his 55 receiving yards. So this video covers just the very basics of using classes in Python. And there's a lot more we can delve into, but I'm going to wait till future videos and then we'll build off of this example. Thank you for watching.